Hey everyone, this is Chris and Donna.
Hello. So today is a very special day. It is Chris's birthday.
Oh gosh.
Happy birthday!
Happy birthday!
And as you can see, we did a little bit of decorating here. It wasn't much, but it was enough to embarrass him. So we're happy about that.
Fortunately, I already got sunburned yesterday, so you can't tell if I'm blushing or if I'm just burnt.
Yeah, exactly. So. Now, ordinarily people take the day off for their birthday, but Chris decided to take only a half day because what better way to spend your birthday than to talk to our awesome Functions customers. So thank you for taking the time.
Only gift I could ask for.
All right, so we're going to get started today with a bunch of demos and some new features. So I will start with showing off a cognitive services demo for a cat review site, because there's one thing the internet is about, it is cats. And feel free to ask questions. This is the same demo I presented at Cloud Cover, but I'm going to present it again so you can ask questions about different aspects of it. And then Chris will be talking about durable functions, which is a new feature that's in preview that we've just recently released. In fact, the blog post went live today, and it's a pretty exciting way to orchestrate multiple functions. And of course, please send us your questions, and we'll try to get to as many as we can on this webcast. So without further ado, let me switch to my machine and show you the functions sample. So the first thing I'm going to show you is actually my hackathon project. It's the functions visualizer. So I give a lot of presentations on functions, and sometimes I'm presenting some pretty complicated function apps. And so it's really useful to be able to visualize how all the different bindings in the app interact with each other. So the function I'm going to show you now is actually pretty simple. If I upload my function JSON files for the function app, what this does is this creates a visualization, and you can even download an SVG file, stick that in PowerPoint. You can also point it at a GitHub repo. So for instance, Chris has this fun example. By the way, this will be really terrible for your bill, so just don't use this. Be safe with this one. It's the exponential scale one, where it creates multiple queue messages. It creates 2 queue messages for every incoming queue message.
If you want to be a top functions customer for the month, go ahead and just run that one consistently.
Exactly.
That's a good one for your bill.
And so you can see that we have 3 functions here, which are the starting the test, actually doing the scaling. You can see that there's a queue input and out trigger and an output. That's where it's actually creating more queues. And then we have the results, which is reading from table storage. So this is a super helpful way to see what's going on with your functions. The whole project is open source. It's based on GraphViz. If you just go to About, you can get to the source on GitHub. So that's functions-visualizer.azurewebsites.net. So let's go back again to the function I'm going to show you, which is a pretty simple function. It's just one function. It has a queue trigger, a blob input binding. Then it does review image and text, which is the function it's going to call. And then it's going to write out to docdb. So let me show you this function in action. So the site is a cat review site. So I wanted to show you content moderation, but to show you an image that fails, this isn't going to be general content moderation, because that would mean showing you an offensive image. So instead, what I'm going to show you is what happens if you upload a photo of something that's not a cat, like a dog, for instance. So first, let's add a photo that we expect will pass. So since it is Chris's birthday, we're going to use his adorable cat. What's her name?
Gerdikins.
Gerdikins. She's this beautiful cat that's sitting here in front of a fireplace. And so we'll say Chris's cat is awesome. And we'll create this review. And so this is just a regular website that's hosted on Azure Websites, as you can see from the URL up here. And what it does is it uploads this image to blob storage. It creates a document in docdb, and then it writes a message to a queue so that the function can process this. And this is a really interesting pattern, because you don't have to change your website code to substantially in order to add content moderation. You just add that queue message, and now you have actual microservice architecture, even though it's a pretty simple example, where you can deploy updates to your function independently of the website. And the other thing is that you often want to do background processing for something like this. I mean, it's unclear how long the content moderation will take. In fact, you might even want to do human reviews as well. So you want something that's listening in the background. You don't want to do synchronous requests. The customer shouldn't have to wait for that. So here I am in Visual Studio, and I'm using the new tooling for Visual Studio 2017, which will be finalized in the next few months. So please try it out, give us your feedback. So at the top, you'll notice we have this function name attribute That's the name that's going to show up in the portal. And then we can use attributes to define our input and output binding. So here you can see we're doing a queue trigger. We have a blob input binding, and we have a docdb output binding. So one thing I want to point out here, this is a feature that not a lot of people know about. So notice that the queue, I have a queue trigger, and then my blob is just pointing to this path. It's input images / blob name. And you might be wondering where blob name came from. Well, it came from the queue payload. This is one of the most powerful features of bindings, is that the data that's in bindings, even if it's in a POCO, you can refer to that in other bindings. So here, the queue payload contains the docdb binding, document and the blob name that you want to actually process. So when you get into the function, you actually are bound to the blob and the docdb document right away. And you don't have to actually write extra code to get those documents. So it's really, really efficient. So what we're doing here is pretty simple. We're just going to use the Vision Services API. And if the top 5 tags in that image contain a cat, we will pass the content moderation for that. And let me show you the body. That's the actual image moderation. We're also going to do text moderation, which I won't demo because that one involves me actually writing offensive language. But you can deploy this to your own subscription. We have this great setup script. And you can go ahead and swear away to your heart's content. So let's run this function. If we go back to the web page, we'll see that the status is still pending. I'm going to refresh this because the status hasn't been changed in docdb. So what the function is going to do is once I start it, it's going to listen off those same queue messages. So notice here also how I'm doing a hybrid debugging experience where my website is in the cloud. It's writing to an Azure queue. Maybe a different team is writing that part of the code. And then I could just run the function and locally and make sure it works. And notice how good these APIs are. Not only does it detect that it's a cat, it says it's a cat sitting next to a fireplace. So these APIs are pretty amazing. I was duly impressed when I put in my cat photos. So now let's show an image that fails. Oh, let's refresh this. And not only do we see the review text, but we also see the cognitive services caption. So let's upload a photo of a dog. My coworker, Christina, gave me this photo, and now it's tilted. So let me go into here so you can see the original. Cognitive services will still be able to process it. But it is her son wearing a dinosaur costume holding a dog, which is pretty adorable. But unfortunately, it is not appropriate for this site because it's not a cat. If it was holding a dog, it would be fine. So, wow. So it says it's a man riding a skateboard down a street, which is interesting. It could be because of the rotation. I don't know. I'll have to try it with the other rotation. See, I'm doing this live, so I haven't actually seen this before. But if we look at the tags, if we look in the result, metadata, sorry, it is in the description. We can see the tags, and we can see nowhere does it say anything about a cat, and the 8th tag is a dog. So clearly it is not a cat, so it fails. And unfortunately, when we refresh the page, I'm sorry, Christina, but your photo did not make the cut. And if we go to the reviews, you'll see that it's in the rejected category. On a real website, you probably would block this entirely. So that's how you build this. Now, one thing you might be wondering is, if you're not familiar with this tooling, is how is it that the function's runtime reads these attributes? So the way it works right now is that it generates a function JSON file in the output folder that matches that function name attribute. So review image and text. We look at function JSON, and we can see it's a queue trigger, it's a docdb binding, it's an output binding for docdb, and then here we're pointing to the actual DLL and the method, the C# method to load. So that's how it all works. And we're going to be improving this experience. Some of you have noted that we have some bugs around binding direction. We're working on those as we speak and trying to figure out the best solution to that. So that's how the Visual Studio tooling works. Are there any questions about that? If not, we will switch to Chris's topic, which is super exciting and new, never before seen in a public forum before, and it is a pretty awesome project. It's called Durable Functions. Take it away, Chris.
Right. So essentially, this is very, very early preview of this feature. We wanted to go ahead and develop this as much in the kind of open as possible. So as soon as we were kind of ready for the first kind of basic user testing. We wanted to open source it, which is what we did last week. And then people found that repo, and so I had to get the blog post out nice and quick. But essentially, like our goal here with this is to basically expose the durable task framework for people who are using functions. In the same way that functions itself was really web jobs as a service, you can see us as offering durable task framework as a service along with functions. You can read through the blog post to get more details about what we're doing and why we're doing it, but I wanted to spend most of my time kind of walking you through what we have available there. So inside the blog post, you'll find a link to the GitHub repo, which brings you to the Azure Functions durable extension. Inside of here, there's a link to documentation, which will actually bring you to the root of the documentation. And the important thing, if you wanted to get started, is this installation button, which explains to you quite a large number of steps to get started. And I want to be very clear here. This is a very early preview. This is not for the faint of heart or for Mac users, unfortunately, at the moment. Right now, it does require using Visual Studio and some local, and we like to use the local tooling a lot because it means that it's very temporary. If you do go into, you can deploy this up to Azure right now and follow some instructions for doing that. But you do have to remember that as we do breaking changes and things along those lines, that you're going to have to work those breaking changes. But working locally, it should be pretty smooth. The demo that I wanted to show today was actually a really cool one involving, and you can actually see that I'm reusing a sample that we've got published here already called human interaction. And essentially the idea here is there's a lot of applications out there that need you to go ahead and just send like a code via text message to a user and then respond to that and wait for that flow to finish for that code to come in. And it was theoretically possible to do this with functions, but it involved a whole lot of state management and stuff like that that was not related to business logic. And so our goal was, let's go ahead and do that simply using the durable task framework and functions. And so you can follow this along on your own after the demo here by just going to the human interaction one. But essentially what I've done is in the local settings.json, I've added my Twilio information. I'm not going to click on that because then you'll own my Twilio account. But inside of here, then I've got my orchestration function. And you can see in here, I'm getting the phone number from the input that I'm going to send.
And notice that he's using orchestration trigger. It's a new trigger type.
Yes. And I'm using the awesome VS tooling for this, which makes it really simple to write these things. Here I can actually go ahead and see whether or not that string is empty, and I can reject this thing if this phone number was empty for some reason. I can generate a new challenge code if I'd like to, and then I can call out to that function and basically wait on what that response is going to be. So this function here is actually going to send a challenge code and return to me what that integer is for me to wait on. And then down inside of here, I'm actually going to retry 3 times to see whether or not I get a response, and the response that comes in is equal to that challenge code. And if it is, I'm going to say authorize true and break. Otherwise, I'll just keep on retrying it the 3 times.
And waiting 90 seconds in between.
Exactly. And if we're finished, I'll return authorized at the very end. And so we can kind of see the full workflow end to end here as when I do the demo. I'm going to use Postman for now. We're eventually going to go build ourselves a nice little spa so that way you can kind of see this in a nicer form. Right now, unfortunately, I did have to use my real phone number, so have fun with that, I suppose. I'm going to go ahead and click on send here. I already see him though reaching for his phone. And on my phone, I should very quickly here get a text message from Twilio. The nice thing here is while I'm waiting on that, I can click on this, and I'm able to see the status of the message. So here I can see it's still running. I can see what the input was, and I can see that the output is null. And I can see what the last time that we updated this function was. Still there. I just got my response back. So now what I can do is I can actually I can show it on the camera here if we get a swap real quick. Make sure that my phone stays alive. I'm not going to show Matthew's troll message. So that's the actual message that I got back from my thing. It says, sent from your Twilio trial account. Your verification code is 9458. So I can click on this one here, which is send event post URI.
And so if we had a web page, it would be
exactly. You just see like you just like type in a text box there.
Yep.
I can then set my body. We're going to do raw application JSON, and I'm going to first type in the wrong number. So I'm just going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, and I can hit send. You can see that if I do that, and then I try to call that same status endpoint, you see that I'm still running. I failed once. And if I were to actually try this 2 more times, it's actually going to fail now. We'll actually see eventually we're going to actually get a 410 response because it'll have finished running. And if I actually go back and see what this result looks like, it should actually be failing here soon. It might be counting the numbers. So let me just try something like that. And there you go, 410 gone is my response now. So now if I look at the status, you can see here that I've actually gotten completed and I've not authorized, it's false. So go ahead and try sending this again. And I'll have to go ahead and get that number again. I can then click on this send event post URI. And then I just need to change this event name here to this. And we'll change this to post. Body is going to be application JSON. Chris is correcting me in the middle of the demo for him. Thank you, Chris.
Oh, that's what happened. That's why you should quit Teams before you run a.
So I'm going to do that, but this one should succeed, fortunately. So that one got accepted. And then if I go ahead and click on the status one for this one here and hit send, this should actually say completed and true because I sent in the proper number this time.
Yeah, awesome.
And so that was, with relatively simple code here in terms of kind of describing what the authorization workflow should look like. And there's an additional function. Thank you, Chris.
Chris is the dev on the team. Next webcast, next time we present this, by the way, he's going to be the one presenting because I think he'll do a better job.
Absolutely.
No offense, Chris.
And that's okay. I don't take anything. Chris
Happy
is better than
birthday.
Chris. Thanks.
Yeah, happy birthday.
And you can see we had this other function that actually sent the SMS message in the first place. So all really simple, really easy now to use functions to send 2FA authentication messages to your users if you wanted to using functions.
Absolutely. And how many lines of code is this?
This whole sample end to end is 91 lines of code, including like the using and a copyright message at the top.
And if we had to do it the old way, it would be.
You're going to have to manage lots of state. You're going to have a lot of error handling. All that stuff is handled for you by the durable test framework.
Absolutely.
And what I did in this case is I actually just cloned the repo, and there's actually a sample project in here which has all of his Chris's samples that he wrote inside if you're ready to use. And so you can go ahead and try out. In this case, this is an actor-like pattern. And I can actually go through here and actually update the counter, increment, decrement. I can do just a sequence here where I'm just going to go ahead and call one function and send the output to another function and then send the output to another function.
So you don't need queues to do this.
Exactly. And I can do more complex things, like based on the output, I can send it to one or the other. And so I can do very complex sequences.
Absolutely. And so it's much easier to read this code. Now, even though there's my visualizer, which is going to help you somewhat, it's way better to actually just look at the code and see, oh, okay, I'm calling this function and then this function and then that function. The visualizer won't tell you exactly what the queue payload is, for instance.
And the backup site content one is maybe my favorite, which is actually doing fan in and importantly, or fan out and importantly fan back in. So I can actually go ahead and take a big batch of work, send it to many different functions so I can split it up into smaller batches and then wait on the response from all of them. And I can even have like a timeout here where if some of the work hasn't finished within a certain time limit and I just want to keep the batch going, I can go ahead and have some error handling cases where I go ahead and like poison queue some of the bad jobs.
Right.
So I can do very, very complex workflows here now without actually having to struggle to describe what that workflow is or make sure that I get all of the actual like error handling correctly. It's handled by the framework.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's pretty powerful stuff. Do we have any questions on this? No questions.
Well, we got some more questions for durable functions.
Oh, of course. Yeah, let's find out. Let's answer some questions here.
All right. So do durable functions scale like functions do in autoscale, or is it a manual process? And also, when will it support JavaScript and TypeScript?
Right. So the orchestrators right now and for the foreseeable future, throughout the preview at the very least, are going to be .NET. The activities can be written in any language. Right now, there is a limitation that you can only output back to the orchestration from C#, but that one will be fixed relatively soon, we're hoping. So we're hoping the activities can be written in any language, and we'll use .NET for the orchestrators for now, and we'll come up with kind of an answer for all the other languages at some point in the future.
And then the other question was scale.
Right, scaling. So the orchestrators themselves are essentially singletons, and so we've got some design docs that we can go into more detail there. The activities scale, the orchestrators essentially don't. So you want to make sure that you be careful with your orchestrations, that you do realize that you have to set basically a set number of partitions, and that is essentially how much scalage you can have with your orchestrators.
Another question from Jose here. When we're using orchestration for functions using durable functions, do we need to implement something like Saga concepts?
You don't need to implement Saga concepts here. It's kind of it's more of like a framework which can help you implement Saga-like patterns. but you're certainly not using stuff like end service bus. For those of you who aren't familiar with Saga, it's a lot of messaging type patterns. There's a couple of different ways that you can describe your patterns inside of the Saga patterns. It's generally used a lot by folks who are using end service bus libraries and things along those lines. You can achieve very similar patterns. For instance, the fan in, fan out is a very common pattern that we see inside of Saga patterns, but it's not limited to Saga patterns, obviously, but you can see them as being very related.
Another one about durable functions. Do they remain running while they're waiting for completion of subtasks? Are they still built?
That's a good question.
Yes, very good question.
So essentially what's happening is every single time in your orchestrator that you call await, we essentially pause billing, and until you actually get a response back, we don't bill you again. And so that's essentially the magic that makes them long running, is that they're actually not running very long. They're running until they have to wait on an external thing, and then you basically wait for that response to come back in, and only then do you actually have your code resume.
And if you're away for a really long time, like more than 10 minutes, then your function app can go idle, and then you'll get woken up again. So it's pretty efficient. So it doesn't improve the 10-minute timeout per se, but it does mean that you can do chunk up your work. So let's say you have, let's say we had a customer who's downloading a bunch of files from an FTP site. And the files were pretty big. Individual downloads wouldn't take that long, but it would be pretty painful to create a queue message for each download. So now all he has to do is add awaits in there and use durable functions, and you can spread out that work over a long period of time. And now you have checkpointing in place, which is really a better way to do it, because I mean, you can run for a function for an hour on an app service plan, but if you get restarted or if something happens during processing, you're going to lose an hour worth of work.
And for instance, in that particular demo I just did with the phone verification, I could actually set it so the timeout was like an hour, not 90 seconds.
Yep.
And if I went through there and sent my response like at the hour mark, it would still go ahead and finish the rest of the workflow just fine. Yep. And so it's a way of writing kind of durable workflows, durable orchestrations, but your functions themselves end still have to run individually within 10 minutes.
And under the covers, we actually use service bus queues, right?
We're actually using storage queues.
Storage queues,
and,
that's right.
Table storage for this implementation. We
That's
might bring in service bus in the future.
That's right. The original durable functions, durable task framework implementation used service bus, and now we're using storage since we already have all the dependency on storage.
And the good news for anyone who is using the durable task framework is we've actually contributed back our support for storage queues. So if you wanted to, you can actually use storage with durable task framework today now as well.
Yeah.
Thanks to Chris's work.
Yeah. Chris has been doing great work on this. Yeah. We will definitely get him on a future webcast.
I just kind of surprised him yesterday with us doing this.
Moving away a bit from durable functions, question from Gary: is there a limit to the number of instances when a function app is auto-scaled in the consumption plan?
Right. So this is a good question because it's not the most obvious answer. In some of our largest regions, you could be running on potentially hundreds of instances underneath the covers. And in some of our smaller regions, it might be as low as 40. The reason is essentially we're running in the spare capacity of app service. And so depending on how large app service is, which is basically a function of how new the region is, we may have more or less capacity. The real answer here is that we haven't had anyone actually hit any of their upper level scaling limits. Even people who are doing, billions of executions a day,
we have a lot of customers that are doing a lot of executions.
So from that point of view, essentially, if you think that you're hitting a limit, feel free to reach out to us on the forums or through opening up a support ticket, and we'll look into it. It just hasn't really come up as an issue. We probably will get around to the point where we document the top level capacity in each region. But it's just one of those things it changes very frequently right now. So we have to come up with a better way of updating those kind of documentation.
Absolutely. Yeah, it needs to be dynamic.
We had a lot of capacity.
We can create a function that does it.
We should create a function that does it.
Question here for Donna from Marcus. Is there a timeline for Azure Functions templates for Visual Studio? Any kind of release data you have available, something other than the VS17 preview? And they're starting to rely on it.
Well, good. It is totally fine for you to rely on it. We have templates that are included. We have almost all the templates that are in the portal. We're going to be adding some more very soon. And you can expect this will go out live with the Visual Studio 15.3 release, which will be in the next couple of months. So please do continue to rely on it. Give us bug reports, and we'll try to get as many improvements as we can into the final product. The other thing I want to point out, this is a pretty cool thing, is that the way we've built this tooling, right now it's a V6, In the next version, it will continue to be a v6, but it will be included in the tooling for Azure. So all you have to do is install the Azure workload. It'll be installed. But because it's a v6, we can update it out of band. So we don't have to rely on the Visual Studio update cadence. So if we find a bug, we're going to just basically make continual improvements through the end of the year. So you can definitely continue to rely on it, give us feedback, and we love to improve it.
So while we're stuck in the preview version now, after the preview version's gone out, we should be able to continuously update it without you having to use preview versions.
Exactly. That once that preview is 15.3, sorry, Visual Studio, I'm using the code name, Visual Studio 2017 update 3. Once that's out, you will no longer be on a preview version of Visual Studio, and the tooling itself will be RTW quality. Good question.
Another question from Mark. If we fan out 500 functions, do we get charged for 500 replays of the durable function?
Right. So the interesting thing that will come up here is you get charged for you do get charged for the replays of the durable functions, and you can control to an extent how often those replays happen. If you're doing 500 instances, essentially it's for each of the replays. So if you're doing 500 instances of a durable function orchestrator, you will be charged for each of those instances and for each of their various activities. So the more you use it, the more you'll get billed for it. That's definitely the case. The real thing to be careful of is if you have if you do plan on having very long orchestrations, you can probably increase the time between checks, and that'll help reduce the number of checks. They do run very fast. Most of the time, it's just checking the state of the current run, and then it goes to sleep again. So we'll probably get more clear about how that billing actually works and provide a couple of examples inside of our documentation. But you will be charged every time that you actually have your logic run. That's generally our policy on Azure Functions. Is if you have your logic run, we have to bill you for it.
Cool. So I just want to show a couple of slides here. Definitely continue to keep in touch with us. If you have any issues or feature requests, you should reach out to us on GitHub, particularly if they have to do with documentation. That's actually our main source for documentation. If you have general feature requests, you can post them there. If you happen to know the structure of our repos, a lot of you do, you can file in the portal or the script or the SDK repos. But if you don't know where to put it, just put it there and we'll move it for you.
That's where your VS feedback's going.
Exactly, yes. If it's a Visual Studio feedback, just be sure to write that in there in the subject line and we'll tag it. On Twitter, of course, we're Azure Functions. If you're not following us already, you should, and tell your friends. We're trying to increase our follower count and get more engaged with the community. So for feature requests, you can also use user voice. We tend to be more responsive on GitHub because the whole engineering team is there. But user voice is also nice because you can kind of go into more detail and you have more votes and that kind of thing. And then if you have any technical questions, you can certainly ask us on Twitter. A lot of times it'll start to get a little detailed, so we ask you to go to MSDN or Stack Overflow. And our engineers are on a rotation where they answer questions. They particularly like Stack Overflow because they get points. So ask away, and they love simple questions because those give them the more points, most points for the least amount of time spent. So if you feel like you have a simple question, don't worry about it. They love it.
I've actually seen like developers like begging me to go ask a simple question on Stack Overflow so they can get their daily
and
points.
They get upset at each other. They're like, you sniped all the easy questions, damn it.
And there's actually a couple community members now that are also answering functions questions on Stack Overflow, and they're like, I'm glad they're helping, but they keep on taking my points. That's great.
So yeah, they're very competitive.
Yeah.
Anything involving points, people tend to be competitive.
Fake internet points.
Yeah. So also please join our August webcast. Sorry, that title was wrong. It'll be Thursday, August 10th at 10 a.m. And of course, you can ask questions on Twitter or on the spot. And we love interacting with you. Thanks for being such great customers.
We actually have a couple more questions.
Oh, awesome.
Just a bit in the last minute.
Yes, great.
About Python as a first-class citizen. Do we have any news?
Cool.
Yeah, let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I mean, I can get really off the rails describing what's going on. So we're essentially working on a new way of doing our language hosting. We're starting with actually nodes. We're actually redoing nodes, so it's going to be hosted as a standalone process rather than using Edge.js, which is going really deep for people, but that's essentially what's happening right now. Once that's finished, we actually also have Java in the works that's already kind of in development. We hope to have some demos of that here soon.
And the reason, tell them the reason that the JavaScript out of proc is useful.
Well, the reason is that I can change my Node.js version to any version that I want to at that point. We're going to probably have some well-tested versions, probably the LTS, but we can have unofficially supported any Node version.
Yep.
And then potentially even run
modules,
with
right?
other things. Yeah, native modules will work just like you normally would. You can use the latest version of like, 8 until LTSs, and we actually have official support for it. And once 9 comes out in experimental mode or whatever, you can use 9 as well. So we hope to make sure that we can then make the best of the Node experience for that reason. We'll be able to add new languages faster with this new model, so Python should be able to follow quickly after we've started to get the Java stuff and the Node stuff out, and we feel it's like it's stable. We'll start to invest in Python at that point.
Exactly. And hopefully on our next webcast, we should be ready to at least show a demo of this new, at least the JavaScript out of proc.
Yeah.
And eventually we'll have .NET out of proc as well. And I think we're working on that a bit right now as well, because that has interesting requirements. Yeah. So what you'll see though is you'll see better performance, especially for JavaScript. And basically the language, the functions runtime will talk to a language worker over gRPC protobuf, and that will mean that you will be able to use whatever dependencies you want in .NET. You can have binding redirects. Yeah. And so because we take a dependency on a particular version of storage, Newtonsoft JSON doesn't mean you have to. So it'll really open up a lot of doors. We're pretty excited about this.
Yeah, should be a lot of really cool news coming about this. And the other things that are coming out alongside that, they're kind of linked together, is also the ability to have cross-plat tooling.
Yes.
So you'll see that coming out around the same time as you start to see the other languages stuff.
And hopefully we can also show a demo of that. We've gotten a lot of it already ported over.
Fabio is tweeting it like every night.
Oh, yeah. The main thing is, I think he's only down to System Web. He just has to replace System Web.
No, he's actually gotten that
cleared. He's gotten that done too.
Yeah,
so I was out for a few days.
He's wrapping up his pull request now.
HTTP is still the problem.
Yeah.
The web host works. I have it running on my Mac.
Oh, nice.
It's very exciting.
So hopefully we will demo that as well on our next webcast. So
definitely will.
So tune in, and
that'll be a big one.
And one more question. It sounds
one last question here from Guru. Is there any way that you can set a threshold on concurrency? As a blob trigger in one of the business scenarios creates 2,000 blobs in one go, which triggers 2,000 instances of the function, and they want to be able to throttle it.
Mm.
So right now we don't have a concurrency limit. It's something that I've actually been thinking about for a while now, and haven't really had a chance to get around to kind of specking that out. One way that you can achieve this without using our system to actually throttle yourself is when you enqueue the messages, enqueue them in batches, where essentially you've set them further out in advance time-wise. So if you know that processing a blob takes about 30 seconds and you want to do 5 at a time, you can go ahead and enqueue 5 messages, set 30 seconds apart with their visibility timeout. This effectively throttles you. It's not quite as clean as just having the runtime throttle you, because that means that you're going to have to wait for basically the next batch to appear, rather than as soon as you have a free slot going off and running with it. Things like durable functions can theoretically help with that, because there is kind of throttling that happens there with durable functions. But we will continue to invest in whether or not we can do proper concurrency controls, because there's some interesting patterns that can come with those things. And we know that there's a lot of scenarios where you do want to limit basically your downstream flow. And while telling you to just use queues to do it is an okay answer for now, I think that it's not the easiest thing. And we'd like to get to that eventually.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you for all the great questions. I'm glad that we got those questions about the stuff we're going to be showing off in our next webcast. So I hope that you all will tune in. So thank you for tuning in.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, everyone.
Happy birthday, Chris.
Thanks.